Well, that's actually a very good segue to our next speaker. Madeleine Redfern is an Indigenous businesswoman involved in high tech and innovation and actively engaged in transformative technologies in telecommunications, transport, and energy. She's the CEO of Can-Arctic Inuit Networks, and very interested in building fiber optic cable into Canada's Arctic, and in general, highly involved in a lot of organizations that are working for the development of that region. So very nice to meet you, Madeleine, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much. So the reason why I'm particularly interested and involved in the issue of airships and actually other technologies, as you just spoke regarding subsea marine fiber optic cable, as well as SMRs, which are small modular reactors, is recognizing that we need transformative technologies and that can dramatically and significantly bring about positive change in Canada's Arctic, and that these should be carefully examined to determine their viability or feasibility and applicability in our region. So not just transformative technologies for the sake of innovation, but also transformative technologies that can truly change the way that we live and the way that we do business in our remote and hyper remote Arctic communities, especially those communities that are only available through road access and do therefore have very limited types of ways in which goods and people can be moved in and out of our territory. So Nunavut, where I'm from, is approximately 2 million square kilometers. It has 25 communities of approximately 38, soon to be 40,000 people. But there are many other communities in Canada's rural remote parts of our country. There are a few communities in Northwest Territories, but also northern Quebec, some of our northern regions of Ontario and Manitoba that can only be have only fly-in access. In the short summer season, there's also ships that are able to deliver goods, but the number of ships, again, is dependent on the size of the community, the location, and how many goods or materials are required for that particular year, as well as the shipping companies, of which there are predominantly two, at least in my region. They've got to try to manage their small fleet. So there's a tremendous amount of scheduling issues. As depending on where you are and depending again on the season, there can be tremendous issues regarding ice conditions. So in Iqaluit, we usually have our first sea lift around the first week of July, but there will have been particular years. I recall in about 2012, there was almost a 6-week delay in getting our first sea lift because there was a lot of seasonal ice that had come into our bay and completely choked up. So the ships were unable to navigate through those pieces of ice. And to just give people a sense of, what that cost implication is to the shipping company, that's anywhere between $75,000 to $100,000 per day. And as a result, what it ends up also doing is that it increases costs to the end customer, because the shipping company has to try to offset those costs or losses. Therefore, the majority of our food is actually flown up, especially our perishable food, from locations such as Winnipeg or Ottawa or Montreal. In the eastern regions, they'll tend to be flown from, northern Quebec will get flown from Montreal, Ontario from other southern locations, whether it's Winnipeg, again for Manitoba, or from Yellowknife into the communities that are in the Northwest Territories. Someone did mention earlier ice roads, and again, a very unique type of transportation, which is now becoming more and more challenging as climate change impacts those communities. And we're seeing the shortening of those seasons, either both at the front end and at the back end, and the loss of trucks on those rivers or lakes, or just the impassability of on roads that are just in atrocious conditions. So, I think most of the speakers before me gave people a good, a relatively good sense of the transportation limitations and challenges. There is, I think, a good or a need for an assessment of the feasibility and viability of airships as a supplemental potential means of air transportation of non-perishable foods, construction materials, business and office supplies. And I do want to sort of touch on, the fact that we fly up so much of our food, absolutely contributes to the high cost of food. Someone did mention that. I was just taking a look at the Canadian North website, and depending on where you're flying goods to and the type of goods, I mean, you're looking at a cost of anywhere from approximately $5 or $20 or more per kilogram of food. And that's why we have the federal government has a program called Nutrition North, which attempts to subsidize and reduce the cost of at least nutritious food. But even with that program, that's almost $100 million a year, food prices are still, significantly higher, and does contribute to food insecurity. In Nunavut, we have, depending on which research that you're looking at, anywhere between 35 to almost 80% of our residents in our communities struggling with food insecurity. There's one sort of stat that I like to say, or wish I didn't have to say, is 8 out of 10 Nunavut Inuit preschool children are food insecure. And almost every Inuit household does have preschool children. It's very, very troubling and discouraging. The cost of construction in Canada's north, where there are no roads, is absolutely astronomical. Before COVID, it was estimated that construction was $400 a square foot. Since COVID, costs have dramatically increased. In Iqaluit, the city is building 18 affordable housing units. I believe 12 are to be 1 bedrooms and 6 to be 2 bedrooms at a cost of almost $600,000 per unit. Now, any construction project requires at least 2, if not 3 years of lead time. And part of that is because of the logistical challenges. If you want to build, such a development like that, or an office complex, or a health center, or an addictions treatment center, one of the biggest challenges will be, not just securing the goods, is actually booking the space that you need on the sea lift. So you have to do that early on, ideally by January for a ship that summer season. And if you do not secure that space early on, you will literally lose and miss a year of construction because you've missed the boat. Even if you manage to secure that space, one of the things that many of us are very aware of is that for the smaller communities, where especially if they only get 1 sea lift a year, a project will end up displacing potentially existing orders and goods, or prevents those customers from being able to do their projects, because it may not be possible for the shipping company to lay on an additional second ship if it's not enough space. So again, you might luck out by securing space, but other businesses or other projects may be delayed by a year, or they have to be flown up. The other thing that's important to understand is that businesses have to ship up a year's supply of goods and products for our communities. So a year's supply of toilet paper, a year's supply of dog food, tinned tomatoes, pasta, rice, office supplies and products. And there's a tremendous cost to businesses that have to front those costs for those goods. And then those goods require storage and warehousing space. So a lot of business in Southern Canada or rest of the world, manage their product inventory very carefully, but they don't need to have on hand a year's supply. This also requires, of course, having the storage or the space in which to be able to have that, and space that the goods are not going to get damaged. So you can't necessarily store paper products, for your printer in an outdoor sea container in certain parts of the year, because it's going to get moisture and therefore damage. So you're adding the combination of the transportation costs, transportation limitations, the cost of construction for storage, the challenges regarding even doing those construction projects, and then just the high cost of living, is all a contributing factor as to why and how it is so expensive, for businesses and for residents to live in the North. This all comes to, therefore, the potential value of at least reviewing and assessing, whether airships can be supplemental and complementary. If you're able, if there is a good business case to demonstrate that, moving non-perishable foods, that construction material, year round, instead of, during that very short window, the ability to bring in, other goods, whether it's for a business that runs a garage and mechanics or any of those, then you truly may have the opportunity of bringing down significant costs, running a business or living in our Arctic remote communities. That's why I'm particularly keen and interested in at least, the Canadian Arctic Innovation Association, which has received funding to do this feasibility and viability study. It could be a total game changer if deemed, viable. It would be looking at the existing sort of transportation realities and costs. It would be looking at where the launch points of the airships could possibly be, where it would be the end of the rail or the end of the road. So possibly Shefferville, Churchill, Yellowknife and or Nuvik, Tuktoyaktuk. And then sort of, market size, of course, is important. Christine spoke to, her client and mine. There's quite a number of mines that are in operation or potentially could be in operation. And so you're looking for all synergies, all, potential existing or new markets that might become viable with these transformative technologies, that can make sense. So I'm, excited at least to look into, airships, and we know that there's a number of different companies that different price points, different sort of stages of development, different sizes, different technologies, and seeing, under what circumstances or under what conditions airships could be deemed viable, and whether or not there would be the need or the requirement of government support and or government subsidies, because we're already, seeing government subsidies, significantly in play from the Nutrition North program, energy subsidies, transportation subsidies. And so you need to also consider, whether or not those subsidies could be better utilized in a way that could support something like airships. So it's a complicated assessment because it's a complicated reality, but it doesn't mean that we can't and shouldn't just, consider potential opportunities or options for transformative technologies, and recognizing that this doesn't necessarily undermine or replace plane cargo and or sea lift. So I'm pretty excited at least that the feasibility and the viability study will begin shortly, and what those findings might be. Thank you.
Madeleine, thank you very much. That's fascinating to hear that perspective. And I think just from what I know about it, I think that absolutely many of those realities would be dramatically transformed by airships. I think you definitely could see construction becoming much cheaper. I think you could see food becoming cheaper if airships were built to scale. My doubt would be whether there's enough demand in that market to get over the R&D hurdle, which is why I think it's important to have multiple sources of demand coming together, which I think is one of the things that's valuable about a conference like this, to help people who are on the demand side become aware of each other and maybe form sort of a coalition that can then help to demonstrate to builders, to investors, that there will be uses for these once they're built. Now, having said all that, there was a question earlier that Katrina Nokelby raised about over consultation, and I was curious to what your perspective on that might be, just sort of burnout with engagement, because I can imagine on the one hand, I would love to be able to tell these communities, hey, there's hope. But on the other hand, it could be years away. There's uncertainties around it. And that would give me some pause. So, I mean, are you seeing sort of burnout with engagement in communities that you're in touch with?
I presume that's a question to me.
Yes, it's a question to you.
It depends on the type of consultation or engagement. So if you're talking about, which I've seen, Inuit organizations, a federal government, a territorial government, doing consultation or engagement on the exact same issue separately, is a bizarre sort of, approach, and utterly frustrates the communities and the residents. So there is need and value to have the different groups work collaboratively and to coordinate. They may have very different, reasons or perspectives on the matter being consulted. And the community is, members are smart and sophisticated enough to understand that, and not have to go out to 3 different sessions on 3 different days, 3 different times. And there's also, I think, consultation fatigue on issues that have been consulted a lot. So anything that is different or new and with an explanation of its value or potential, assessment, like airships or small modular reactors, or transformative telecommunications, whether that is subsea fiber optic cables and or LEOs, is unique and different enough that I think community members would be interested in. So it's really important to have a good, consultation plan and strategy, and that you provide information beforehand to those communities so that they're well primed and prepped. I love, sending out an FAQ beforehand, who's coming, an introduction, the agenda. Unfortunately, more often not, what happens is that there's a notice of consultation, venue, date, time, and what the topic is, but no information shared to the community beforehand. So that is usually results in low uptake and possibly the need to do further consultation rather than good consultation from the onset.
Right, I see. Yeah, thank you. Another question I have here. So you were talking about a feasibility study. Do you know where the data for that study will be taken from? And the question also suggests the airship community should provide the technical logistic data. Do you know whether they'll be reaching out to the airship community in order to find out that kind of logistic data for the study?
Well, it's from what I understand, Barry is Prentice and his team are taking a lead on sort of the research that will be done. Barry's network is quite extensive. Of course, it's important to reach out to the companies that are in R&D development. It's also important to ensure that one, looks at the research that's necessary about on the ground and making those matches and connections. So there's a team of us with our distinct roles, and looking at government funding, looking at various interests and opportunities. So I would say the goal is to ensure that it's extensive but relevant, and so that we don't miss out key or critical elements of that study to, as I said, ultimately deem whether these airships are viable or feasible and under what conditions that they are. We're also very aware that there's also another sort of research being done, and that there needs to be synergy or coordination to ensure that there isn't overlap. I'm a big believer in cooperation in research and divvying out the work and filling in the gaps, and ultimately sort of seeing these two projects align with each other rather than assessments that are inadequate, because if they're inadequate, ultimately they're not as you want that to then determine whether or not there is a business case for airships and under what conditions those business cases would, as I said, be not only technically viable but also financially viable.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I guess we have a few